Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 3 coverage of my games from the Pacific Southwest Open. Let's see, I had the black pieces in this game, and my opponent was another young man rated 1749. My opponent in the previous game, his rating, I didn't mention it, was 1733, and my rating for this tournament is 1763. So you see that I'm facing comparably rated players. Anyway, my opponent starts off with d4, go knight f6, goes bishop f4, and I go d5, which I do when I see bishop f4. If he plays the normal c4 move here, then I could play the Nimzo. I probably would. I like the Nimzo as my first choice, and there's other ways to play. But when I see this bishop f4 move, it's an indication that white is going for the London system or something like it, and d5, just putting a pawn in the center, is a good response. It leads to pretty much an equal position for black. He goes knight f3, continuing with the London system idea, and I go c5. So this is the main line of the London system, actually, and it's a decent system for black. It does lead to equality. As I said, you immediately put some pressure on the center, and try to show that his early piece deployment is kind of neglecting the center a little bit. Let's see, you don't have to worry about him taking the pawn. You can round that up with either the knight or with the queen check. Both those moves are fine. So he played e3, that's the main move here. And now knight a6 is not so attractive because the bishop would just trade it off, leaving black with doubled rook pawns. But you still have this idea of queen a5 check to pick up the pawn. So you don't have to worry about defending that pawn just yet. You can go knight c6. And now he went h3. This is actually not the main line anymore. Up to this point, we've been doing the main line. The main line continues here with c3, and I would go e6. White would go knight bd2, and I would play bishop d6, and just trade off that London bishop. And this, like I said, is a position that leads to equality. And, well, I'll come back to this point in a second. He played h3, and I could have gone with the same kind of setup. I could have played e6 and bishop d6. e6 immediately defends this pawn. And I would get a position very similar to the mainline position. It's just that white would be having played this h3 move instead of c3, which probably would follow at some point. And that would be a decent position for black, maybe even better than the main line, because you could argue that after the bishop trade that this move this move is maybe not so useful, although it does keep a knight out of the g4 square. So it's still in the range of about even, and white can also avoid the bishop trade by playing knight to e5. That also leads to some interesting complications. But well, I had faced that position a lot recently, that kind of typical London system setup. It seems to have gotten really popular in Blitz, so I've just seen it too many times, and I just wanted to go for something different. Now, you can question this. I mean, if whenever you go for something different, you're taking a risk. Even if it's objectively okay, you're still getting into positions that you are not as familiar with. So if you want the absolute best result, then probably sticking to the lines that you're familiar with will achieve the best result. But on the other hand, you play chess for fun as well as for results, and I just was not in the mood to get that same old position on the board once again. So I decided, instead of pushing e6 right here, I would take care of the hanging pawn on c5 by just trading it off. And this is a precursor for developing my bishop. And I just bring my bishop out here. So that was the idea, was to just trade there, so I didn't have to worry about this, didn't have to play e6 right away, and I can get my bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e6. Interestingly enough, the Chess Engine says you can actually just play bishop 5 right away without the trade, but I wasn't sure of that. So apparently there's still, you either have a way to round up that pawn or you get some compensation. I guess knight to here is another way to round up the c pawn, so maybe it's still not good to take it. Anyway, I traded and developed my bishop, and this is fine. This is also a position that is okay. So he went bishop d3, interestingly challenging my bishop and I went e6. And well, the funny thing is, I was kind of expecting him to play a move like knight to h4 there, hitting my bishop, and I was going to play e6 anyway, and just give up the bishop pair and get these doubled pawns. The way the game went, he went and challenged with the bishop, which develops a piece, so that's logical. But on the other hand, after this exchange, I didn't have to give up the bishop pair, so neither side has the bishop pair now. And even though I have doubled pawns here, I have a strong point in the center. That was kind of the idea of playing this way, is to develop this nice square in the center in exchange for taking on some pawn weaknesses. But the other point is that now we've got a structure with dark squared bishops. My pawns on light squares are good for my bishop. It means it can freely travel throughout the board. And white's bishop, although at the moment it's outside the pawn chain and has decent scope, in the long run it might find itself a little bit hemmed in or restricted by the pawns in the center on the same color. So I have something to play for in the long run, and I want to preserve my bishop at this point. Let's see, he castled, and I went bishop e7. So that explains why I go bishop e7 instead of bishop to d6. I'm going to keep that dark squared bishop on, and have that to patrol the dark squares and have these pawns to control the light squares, and just see how it goes from here. He goes queen d3, looking at my loose pawn here, and I go knight e4, so I get my knight to a good square. And now he plays a typical London system move, pawn to c3, just shoring up his center. I castle. Goes knight bd2, and I go rook to c8. You know, it's interesting. He could have skipped that c3 move and gone directly with this knight to c3, challenging my knight. I probably don't want to trade. I'll probably just leave the knight there, and he might have ideas of coming to b5. But because I've cleared out the pieces on the queen side, knight to b5 can always be met by rook to c8, and it doesn't. And I have control of this square, so it doesn't matter that he's got his knight and his bishop coordinating on that dark squared diagonal. So that would also be okay for black. But he played c3 here. And like I said, the typical London system setup. I castle, plays knight bd2, play rook to c8, putting my rook on a good file. Maybe in the long run I could think about doing some kind of minority attack against these pawns over here. He goes knight e5, hopping his knight into that good square. So I don't want to leave the knight there. I decided to just trade it off. I took, he took, and then I played f6. And well, you could question this f6 move, because I have put a pawn on a dark square now, and it's kind of restricted my bishop, but my bishop still has some scope over here supporting these queenside pawns coming forward. So I felt this was a good trade-off, and I wanted to get his bishop out to the center. And let's see, he went here with queen to d7. The chess engine gives the best line here as oh, I went here with queen to d7. The chess engine gives the best line here, by the way, as bishop to d6, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook a to e1. And it rates this position as about even. Let's see, I went queen d7. This is also okay. I'm just getting my queen off the back rank and connecting my rooks. He goes f3 to kick my knight. I was sort of expecting this, and I have a good square for my knight. I drop it back to d6, and he played his knight out to b3. So he's obviously looking at the c4 square with his knight, and I decide I want to just I mean, he's looking at the c5 square with his knight, and I decide I want to just trade it off if it hits that square. So I move my knight to c4. That's you know, a knight on d6. It's actually a pretty good location for that knight in this structure. It's looking out in two different directions. Well, my knight coming to c4 also is hitting this b2 pawn. So he defends it with rook f2, and preparing to double rooks somewhere. He can arrange them along almost any file. You could double on the E file, perhaps go after my bishop, or perhaps come over here on the queen side and try pushing some pawns too. And I was thinking his knight maybe is a little awkwardly placed here, and I would try and dislodge it. And this also kind of fits in my general plan of expanding on the queen side and creating some pawn weaknesses over here. So I start with the move a5, and he played rook d1. And this I thought was a very strange move. I had to say, I didn't quite understand the point of this move. And maybe if you want to think about this a little bit, maybe you can pause the video here and try and figure out what White was thinking with that move. I'm going to come back to this point. I'm going to ramble on for a bit and talk about what happened in the game. But first, why I thought it was strange was it's kind of setting these pieces up for a nice knight fork on b7, and I can immediately try and dislodge his knight, and his knight doesn't seem to have any good squares. And so, well, before I get onto that, Chess Engine gives here instead of a4, which is the move I played, the Chess Engine gives here rook f to e8 as the best way to play. Let's see, rook e2, preparing to double on the d file, and g5, expanding on the king side, and b6, just holding the queen side. The Chess Engine wants to play like that, and it actually likes black a little bit in this position. So I have to say the whole game up to this point was pretty well played. The Chess Engine's evaluation shifts between plus 0.2 and minus 0.2, which is a very, very small difference with Stockfish. And so basically we've been playing top moves the whole game. So anyway, a good game so far, and that would be a way to continue with maybe some slight edge to black. But as I said, I thought this knight had no good square to go to, and I went to a4. And so let's illustrate some of the possibilities. Well, first of all, the knight goes to d2, then I just take on b2, and that's a big fork there, and that's just winning. If the knight retreats, say the knight goes back to c1, and I had actually calculated this line, knight to c1. What I have is I can now bring this bishop to light with the move a3, and he can either, if he just pushes the pawn forward, then the knight to b7 idea is on because the pawn defends my knight. And if he takes, then I can take back with the bishop, and once again I'm introducing this threat of knight b7. And this is not, I mean, it's not totally winning for black, but there's actually a big advantage for black. I've created this pawn weakness here. I have some threats, and I've got active pieces, and so this is a significant edge for black that the Chess Engine is giving black, like a plus or a minus 0.7 or so almost a pawn advantage there. So definitely that would be good. So the only move that White has here is knight to c5, which he played pretty quickly. And when I calculated this line, I had originally planned just to take it with the bishop, and that would have gone like this: say bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes. And I thought initially I thought I was just winning a pawn, but as I looked at this, let's see, White would play something like rook e2 here. So I looked at this more. I didn't play this. I was thinking about this in the position and wondering if I could do better, because even though I'm a pawn up, my pieces are a little bit awkwardly placed. This pawn is isolated, these pawns are doubled, the rook here is kind of exposed and can be kicked back with some pawn moves perhaps. And in fact, the Chess Engine rates this position as even. So that was a good call by my opponent, that he could actually get away with playing this knight c4 move. So I was in this position right here, where I had originally planned to take with the bishop, and I started to think about this and look around for a better way to play it, and I came up with this idea. Notice that if I take with the rook and he takes with the pawn, I can take back with the bishop, and I've got this nice skewer. So I've gotten, I'm still a pawn up, and I've got this skewer, and I will be able to get the exchange back. And so I was imagining a line like this. This is the line I calculated was rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, and then I thought he might try to get his pawn back because I have grabbed a pawn here. Play queen takes d5, I would take, he would take, and then at this point I have to get the exchange back. Bishop takes, king takes, and then I can grab the b pawn because his piece has been lured away. And of course he can grab my f pawn, but that was a doubled pawn anyway. And I also noticed is that in this position I have the move knight to b2, forking the king and the pawn. And actually after I win that c pawn, I stay a pawn up, and the chess engine gives black an advantage here. Maybe not a full pawn advantage because this bishop is now going to be pretty active. He can activate his bishop, but I have winning chances in the endgame because I'll have two pawns against one over here. I just have to manage to coordinate somehow. His bishop actually is controlling a pretty good square with b8, so it's not a full pawn advantage, but anyway, a solid plus for black, and that was what I imagined. So in this position, let's back up a couple moves. In this position, yeah, as I was let's erase the lines. As I was thinking about it, instead of playing bishop takes, I played rook takes. And now I will give you a clue here. Rook takes is actually a mistake. And so you can maybe pause the video here and see if you can figure out what is wrong with my reasoning, or where is the flaw in my plan. Okay, I think this is a very interesting position. I think you should be able to figure the answer out, so please take your time and try and figure it out. I'm going to give the answer away now. So like I said, I did play rook takes c5. He did take. I took back with the bishop, and now he played the move that I did not see coming. He played queen takes c4. He didn't take the pawn. He took the knight. And this is what I missed. This rook is on the d file pinning the pawn. My queen is completely undefended, so I can't take his queen. I'll just be down a whole piece. Well, I could take his queen on, but I give my queen up, so I stay down a piece in every line. So that was pretty interesting, and I wonder if my opponent was thinking of all of this. If we go back to move 19, he played rook d1 in this position, and that's the move that set up these threats. And that was when I went a4, and he played knight c5, and he played knight c5 pretty quickly. So he must have had some idea that the exchange here would weaken would open up the d file, and so his rook would be useful on the d file. Anyway, but he probably didn't predict that I would take with the rook. He was probably just thinking of the line where I take with the bishop, which is also okay for white. So like I said, up to that point, see, in fact, let's back up. Up to exactly this point, the game has been even, and there's not been any blunder on either side, so both of us were playing well. But, well, sometimes you get lulled into this false sense of security. If you're playing well, you seem to be able to calculate ahead and see things on the board. I mean, the line I calculated was reasonably deep, and actually noticed something at the end of that line, a tactic at the end of that line, which is what you're supposed to do. But you're also supposed to look for flaws. You're supposed to find the errors in your own thinking, and you get a little bit too complacent if things are just going along the way you expect. Sometimes you get too complacent, and that's probably what happened here. And I wasn't being critical enough of my own ideas, looking hard enough for those moves that white has that might disrupt my plans. And he found it. So rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, and he played queen takes. And now it's actually just game over. There's no way out of this. The best line here, according to the chess engine, is go ahead and grab the exchange back and play rook to d8 to defend the pawn. And, well, he would retreat his queen. And, well, he's just a bishop up. I've got one extra pawn, but it's a doubled pawn. Yeah, that's a pretty losing position. I tried something a little different. After queen takes c4, I tried queen e7. So I'm unpinning so that his queen needs to move, and I'm defending my bishop and maintaining the pin here. And I'm also introducing this threat. If I could get this rook in here, I could play queen here, and that would actually mate due to the pin on this this rook here. But, well, it's white's turn. I don't get two moves in a row. So he plays queen takes d5, check, chasing my king here, and then he plays bishop to d6. And this forces some more exchanges, and actually I can no longer take the rook here. Well, I can take the rook, but after I move my queen, he'll get my rook. So after this, I'm actually down a whole rook, or I could just exchange out here. Anyway, gets to a very simple position. So I just resigned at this point. So I thought it was an interesting game, and although it did have a quick turnaround and a sudden end, it's a pretty good illustration of the kinds of things you have to be on the lookout for in these games. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned. I'll be back with coverage of my round 4 game from this tournament. See you then.